Hey everyone, I'm Rather Coherent, and as the campaign's wrapped up, albeit not quite in the way that I had wanted it to be, I figure I should do a tier list of how I feel about all the different proficiency classes that I've been playing with. And for this tier list, any changes I've made in my campaign I'm talking about, and it's worth noting if anyone ranks classes that are from mods, their campaign is presumably heavily modded, and there are tons and tons of factors going in. So this is specifically for the campaign I just played. With all the modded enemies, the 8-man squads, the massively increased pod counts, so many different changes happen when you start heavily modding XCOM that even if the class itself isn't touched, the environment that class is in has changed so drastically that a statement for one campaign won't be true for another. And I'm going to start this off by giving the best demonstration of this possible with the Assault. The Assault is one of my favorite classes. And I think in base game XCOM, it's notably better. It's called the Ranger in base game XCOM. Don't worry about it. But the Assault is really, really strong at finishing off enemies and finishing off pods in particular. If you know how to manipulate line of sight, if you know how to count the pods on the map, you can pretty reliably do some crazy shit with your Assault, especially in the early game when your units aren't that accurate. And we should go over to their tech tree real quick. Especially in the early game when you have Honed Edge to get those guaranteed hits and then Breakthrough to reposition into a safe tile after you take the attack. At Sergeant, Assaults are fantastic at getting kills that no other character could have reliably gotten, and especially true because at Sergeant in the early game, one of your most terrifying enemy units is the Sectoid, which is weak to melee attacks. The issue with Sergeants really has nothing to do with what's on this skill tree. It has to do with the campaign I'm playing. It's not unusual for me to play really cautiously, pull one pod of like 6 dudes, be afraid to run in for melee or even run in with run and gun for a flank, pull back as I'm dealing with the pod, and then the next turn, 2 or 3 more pods pull and I'm dealing with like 10 to 20 enemies. And there's just no point in my mod setup where you're safe to run in with melee attacks or to run in with run and gun. And the core functionality of the unit, this is the thing that really drags Assaults down, is that they kill units that are close to you. Combat Engineers and Zappers also have shotguns. Marines and Snipers have insane accuracy on their guns. All of my units kill units that are close to them. That's just a subcategory of killing units, which they already did. So the niche for this character is being better at killing units if you can get close to them, a criteria that they can't do very well at all with the number of difficult modded enemies that I'm seeing. And then, what really crushes them down to the C tier is the fact that they do nothing else. There's no utility. You get prep for entry, which is complete short-range garbage. You get lightning reflexes, that's huge utility. It's about all the soldier really gives you most of the time. Eventually, late game with ruler suits and high ranks, the soldier starts being able to do some pretty gross things, but that's true of virtually every soldier. A C tier character isn't bad, Cs get degrees, the character functions. But I would rather have virtually any other unit in a campaign than the Assaults that I've had. I should mention, however, I do have a not available ranking because there's a single specific character that I don't feel comfortable ranking, and that is the Artillery Spark. I don't think the Artillery Spark's a bad class. I expect I'd put it somewhere between high B and low A if I were ranking it. But I don't like playing with them, so I haven't played with them enough to give them a ranking. Their core concept, I don't even have one to show you their tree, is that they have a gun that takes 2 shots to shoot, or 2 actions to shoot rather, and it costs an action to reload, and they have 2 actions a turn, thus the problem. However, that gun also completely ignores cover, instead dealing damage reduced by the percentage of cover they would have had. So that's a really interesting thing. Then they also have like Zapper levels of artillery destruction. However, because they're a Spark, they can't take cover, and because they aren't an Infiltrator with stealth and healing or a Pioneer with insane durability, they have nothing to protect them. And they really do want a field support to be reloading their gun, and at this point we're talking about so many things, you start applying roster pressure to optimize them. I find them to be clunky when you're playing with them, and playing with them optimally requires jumping through a lot of hoops that no other soldier requires you to do, and I find them to be generally frustrating. I don't think they're bad, the playstyle is just so aggressively not for me that I choose to avoid them entirely. Now, as I said, I'm going to be talking about everything I was using in my campaign, which includes my own custom mods to rebalance things. So I will say that if I were ranking the base Proficiency Skirmisher, I would put them at the bottom of C tier. It's a functional unit, they get some stronger abilities as they rank up, but a squaddy Skirmisher, the base Proficiency Skirmisher, is, in my opinion, the worst unit in the game outside of rookies. And I say that not talking about hero units, but talking about all the units. I would rather have a squaddy of anything else. Squaddy Skirmishers in base Proficiency class pack get 2 actions to shoot their gun, which they can't reliably land shots with. They have a melee attack that is not a guaranteed hit, and they can't move after using it. And they aren't accurate enough with these tools. The ability to use Marauder to shoot twice doesn't matter because you have to run forward to get the accuracy bonus. The ability to grapple isn't helpful because you're likely grappling into a tile without cover or with only half cover, putting you in tremendous danger on a unit you only get 1 of. There's so many problems with the baseline Skirmisher that I needed to build an entire rework of it for me to be happy with it. And this is not me criticizing Proficiency Skirmisher. It's the best version of Skirmisher I had used until I made my own, which I built entirely off the shell of Proficiency Skirmisher. This is me criticizing how absolutely fucked the base game Skirmisher was, that even what I view as a massive improvement over it was only good later in the game, and at the start of the game was one of the worst units available to such a degree that I would still put it overall at the bottom of my C tier. We'll get to where I rank it with my changes later, because I don't rank mine at the bottom of C tier anymore. I hate to do this, because I want to rank them much higher than this. In my heart, I really, really do not want to put the Tech Specialist in C tier. And I want to put the other half of the Specialist from the base game in C tier as well, the Field Medic. With some classes, like the Grenadier from the base game, or is it called the Heavy? I can't keep track of what the base game XCOM units are called because they all change from game to game, and I only play mods that also change their names. It's a real hassle. But the base game Grenadier gets split into the Marine and the Zapper, and it feels like both of those classes are sufficient on their own. But a medic that can only heal from close range isn't very good compared to a medic that can heal from across the map as a blue move. And somebody who specifically counters tech units isn't the best unit to have around in a general sense. Don't get me wrong, there are turns where, like, you hack a tower, you get 12 action points back, and congratulations, that's episode 81 of my campaign. That's my last episode. We won that because a tech specialist was able to hack something. But by and large, over the course of a campaign, being able to blow up robots in the mid-game with 1 action is really valuable. That helps a lot. But overall, what the tech specialist is doing is it's just sort of helping to mitigate timers, right? You're able to hack something from far away, and that means you're not under nearly as much time pressure. The actual value the unit gives you in a fight isn't that great. The fact that you will usually see at least 1 mech in combat protocol can do a lot of work against it's really nice, but I find that tech specialists are a sufficient unit with a niche that it fills. It's a meaningfully better unit than the Assault because, yeah, the Assault's generally better on a turn-to-turn basis, but its peak is nowhere near as high as the tech specialist is. I'm going to talk about Scions at the end of all this because when I look at Field Medics, if you watch my campaign, you understand why I immediately bring up Psionics. I view Field Medics as like the Scion pool, right? We're going to take whatever Field Medics rolled Scion and we're going to use them, and the rest can go straight in the dumpster. And in my campaign, I got 1 Field Medic Scion, and that unit's a fucking hero. But we're going to be talking about Field Medics in general right now, not the best, the cream of the crop Field Medics. And for that, they don't do shit. Like, they just don't. Let me go to their trees. I'll talk about Tech Specialists too a bit more in detail. You would think Field Medics would be nuts, because the first ability they get is just a run-and-gun on a 2-turn cooldown. The damage penalty really is not a big deal. And they get access to Burst Fire, which is, you know, basically rapid fire. It's really good. But their aim is terrible. And their ability to actually use these things functionally offensively is just really, really unimpressive. The main thing a medic does is they allow you to get more medkit charges and then use the ability Triage, here it is, to mitigate wound times. Additionally, once you reach Sergeant, they get advanced trauma kits, which makes it far less likely for your soldiers to actually die, and if you revive them, they come back with substantially more health. So the main thing a medic does is they mitigate the worst case scenario. They mitigate wound times in the strategy layer, they mitigate deaths sometimes, and that's incredibly valuable. Because of Adrenaline Rush, because they do have a gun that they can get close range bonuses on. I should mention that Colonel perks don't matter too much for your overall ranking. Getting to the end game is far more than half the battle. If you have a medic with Burst Fire, you've done really, really well, and the worst is probably behind you. On a day-to-day basis, this is the soldier with the lowest aim progression in the game, and you could take combat conditioning, but that's going to cost you AP that could have went on someone else, because you really, really want advanced trauma kits. Like, the whole reason you're bringing in medic is advanced trauma kits. And I think that maybe it's the other way around. Like, maybe I should be taking combat conditioning, and then if I need to, if I really care about the units on my team, I AP buy advanced trauma kits. I'm not sure. And you have stuff like reposition. There's a ton of mobility, action, economy stuff right here. But it's just, the unit has such terrible, terrible aim, a basic gun, no abilities that let them shoot the gun multiple times. They just let you shoot the gun after moving or shoot the gun and then move. In the late game, with a superior aim PCS on high ground and a superior scope, this medic can do shit. But throughout the vast majority of the campaign, I'm bringing them for triage, and I'm not even particularly happy that I'm bringing them. And when we talk about Scions, we'll talk about why psionic medics in particular are fucking nuts. But generally speaking, medics just aren't very impressive units. They don't do a whole lot. Going over to medics, you can see I typically take both Overload and EMP Shockwave. This means that in the mid game, your Lieutenant Tech Specialists are able to just point and click delete enemy sparks, and that is incredibly valuable. Additionally, having access to a free action failsafe, high tech rating, and just the ability to use Haywire with all of that to temporarily shut down threatening units, you probably can't get to the point where you're reliably taking control ever, but failsafe does let you take that gamble if you want to. The overall point of this unit is definitely to deal with enemy mechs, and they're definitely better at that in the early game. They do get access to upgraded scanners with electronic surveillance, although they won't all roll this, and that's very, very strong. Not many classes get access to this, and the only one that has it as a baseline is the field support, who we'll be talking about later. And they have some very strong AWC perks with hot charge batteries for multiple back-to-back uses of your abilities and sprint for free movement. You get access to Marauder, and that means this is one of the few units in PCP that baseline can get access to really, really good shredding abilities. Again, Colonel doesn't matter that much, but miniaturized munitions is great for shredding. You get 2 copies of a Shredstorm cannon. This nerfs the damage, not the shred it gives, so that's basically just 2 full copies of a Shredstorm cannon. It's incredible. So there's a lot of late game utility this unit picks up after it finishes dealing with the early game stuff. On the whole, I like Tech Specialist a lot, and I want to put them in low B tier because of how much stronger they get right at the end of the game. Most units don't scale up as much as this represents. However, they just don't do enough in the early game especially. Getting through Squaddy and Corporal on Tech Specialist sucks. And then in the mid game, when you're like you send them on a team, or on a mission rather, and there just aren't sparks, you're just like fighting snakes and mutons, and you're like, wow, I wish this unit was anyone else. They have a niche and they're strong in that niche. And then in the late game, they scale up a lot. So I'm putting that at the top of the C tier. If you had the Shadow Chamber all game along and you knew if you would be seeing sparks, I think I'd rate this unit into B tier. But because of that awkward thing where you bring the anti-spark unit and there's just like nothing, it's a lot worse. And additionally, it should be noted that a lot of the power of this unit is the ability to heal sparks, and I got a ton of value out of that. But if you aren't healing sparks, the ability of your Tech Specialist to, heal just goes away. It's just a resource you don't have anymore. And that would make them a lot worse than I perceive them to be as well. You could actually move them down if you weren't utilizing sparks the way that I was. Next up, starting off our B tier, I'm going to put in the Zapper. The Zapper is a humble position. You don't get the kills, you don't get the crazy damage numbers, you blow up the cover, and your teammates kill them. However, that is a critically important part of every team. And there are other ways to go about cover destruction, but the Zapper is typically the best at doing that job. Even though other classes, like the Combat Engineer, can encroach on it a little bit, they don't stand up to the Zapper in terms of the sheer longevity of cover destruction supplied. And that's really the entirety of why they're getting into B tier, but let's go look at their skill tree a little bit and talk more about them in depth. Now, I should note that I have some changes to my Zappers. I made some changes to have this be more dedicated to utility grenades, explosive grenades, guns in the middle, just reorder the tier tree a bit for that. And the impetus for this was that I felt they should have volatile mix, and that was removed with Proficiency class back. I feel like that's just a core part of grenades continuing to scale up in the late game, and at no point have I fired a grenade, seen volatile mix pop up, and thought, wow, I dealt too much damage. It's very worth noting, though, that my Zappers might deal 2 more damage than yours. It's the constant asterisk next to everything I say about mod setup changing everything. Now, in terms of the unit itself, bigger explosions, more damaging explosions, grenades now disorient. The start of the tree is just getting better and better at explosions, and it's incredibly important to this character's utility that they can equip a shotgun. So, very likely, the way this character works is essentially it's just an assault without its abilities, and instead it's hurling grenades instead of being useless at mid-range, right? When they run into you or the fight just closes naturally over time, you can still blue move and take a shot with a shotgun. And the difference is that you're hurling incredibly huge damaging grenades across the map instead of being sad like the assault does. It is so much more functional at mid-range to play a Zapper than an assault. And then as you get into the higher ranks and you get charge, which is just run and gun that can't miss, it's like, oh, so why am I playing with assaults? And that's not even necessarily the right choice. You could take rapid deployment or salvo and justify those instead. This is an incredibly powerful spike at Captain. And it's not like you stop being good. You get heavy weapons later, you get Shredder if you want it. This perk tree has always felt a little bit weird to me, but I also kind of love it. This one's not crazy, but again, at Colonel, this soldier does get meaningfully better. The thing it does isn't glorious. It's not the most glamorous position, but there's never been an XCOM game where specializing in throwing grenades has been bad. You could play XCOM 1993 and have a guy who just walks out the Sky Ranger, with like fucking 14 grenades and no gun, and that guy would be a champion. He'd be great in that game. They're great in XCOM 2012. They're great in XCOM 2. We're starting to get into the very, very good classes where I'm actually being harsh about what doesn't make it into A. And I don't like saying this, but I'm going to put Sharpshooter in B tier. Now, if you've been watching Iron Rhino destroy every single enemy for the past 10 episodes of my campaign, killing just like 2 people a turn, just like Dead Codex, Dead Spectre, every turn, you might think I'm crazy. What about the other snipers? Because this is the thing that matters. Your best unit in a class where you've been stacking all campaign on them is not what I'm ranking. I'm ranking the class in general. Iron Rhino, your aim stacked marksman, yeah, they're an S tier. Your aim stacked marksman's incredible. Your tech specialist, let's try that again. Your tech stacked specialist is probably an A tier unit because they're going to be more reliably able to shut down units. And they're going to be more reliably able to get crazy bonuses, like having 100% on hacks to get extra actions. When you stack a unit, your mobility stacked assault, it's actually probably just like there. Like, you still can't run forward. It's not an issue that you couldn't get there previously. It's that running there kills you. You run and gun into 15 units. You kill one. What next? Where are you going to go that doesn't die? It's not an issue of getting there. It's an issue of being dead once you do. But stacking on a unit makes it way better. I'm ranking the unit overall, and most marksmen are not Iron Rhino. They don't have like 25 extra aim. They're not guaranteeing shots every single time they shoot anything, even without high ground. They're not the ludicrous shit like that. And they're still very good. But the fact that they might miss their shot and not get the second shot from Raptor's Perch, let's go over to the trait. Iron Rhino has 106 base aim, no PCS, no scope. Major Seething Work has my second highest ranked marksman. They're sitting at 88 aim, a substantial downgrade. And you can see, I'm pretty committed to top tree when it comes to marksman. Lead the Target is incredibly valuable. It's the main reason I was considering putting him up to A tier. This allows you to get an Overwatch ambush without a Reaper during the enemy turn. You can use Lead the Target to ambush the enemy during their turn and essentially bypass their initial scamper during your turn. This is in every way better than the Beagle Rush maneuver. It's very strong. Then you get High Approach Angle, which makes high ground much, much better. You get Raptor's Perch for an extra shot from the high ground. Start dealing more damage some of the time, continue dealing more damage, and there's perks you can buy throughout the tree. There's stuff like Bandolier, Low Profile, and Electronic Surveillance, all of which are worth buying for various reasons. Quick Hands allows you to essentially just, shoot your gun far more often. It's incredible. This is something you would want to buy with AP on basically every late game sniper. But they do one thing, and they do it very, very well. They don't do it well enough on their own. Field supports and other forms of giving aim bonuses can really get them to function higher. It's just stacking aim to get them to function higher. Having access to a superior PCS very early in the campaign can allow them to jump up the list. But I feel that, generally speaking, a marksman is not an A tier unit. It's good at killing, but it's not incredible, and that's all it does. And it really, really wants the map to cooperate, right? It wants high ground with good sight lines. And if it doesn't get that, it's going to perform at a notably lower level of effectiveness. So while it's very good at what it does, unless you've done some crazy aim stacking and have some really good equipment, it's not so good at killing that it starts breaking out of its normal niche. I just realized I recorded all of this while still unresizable, but by the grace of God, you can see everything. Next up, we have our first A tier unit. It's the Marine. And again, we're not talking about the aim stack Marine. We're not talking about the Marines that randomly roll into Pounce or Overseer. We know those guys are S tier. You've got your Dark Horse shooting their gun literally nonstop. You can't get them to stop if you won't. They can't miss either. They're just ridiculous. But your average Marine is a very solid A tier unit. They're very good at killing, and they get steadily better at killing as the game goes on, as their gear improves. For most of the game, though, that's not their job. Their job is suppression. Let's go over to the character sheet and talk about that. Coming over to Marines, you can take covering fire and pin them down, so that your suppression applies disorient, mobility penalties. It's going to give those penalties as well as the aim penalty no matter what. Even if you shoot or fail to shoot, that penalty will stick around. And that's just necessary, especially in a modded campaign. You have things like Prime Enemies, Omega Berserkers, Alien Rulers, things that are just getting too many actions unpredictably, and by limiting their mobility and their accuracy, you severely limit how dangerous they can be. It's a simple fact that you also can't kill every enemy you see, so sometimes rather than trying to kill one of them, simply using suppression is great. Their baseline ability, Fire Discipline, That's not it. Their baseline ability, Sustained Fire, allowing them to shoot twice in a turn if you can get them in the position they need to be, is absolutely incredible. As you can see, there's a lot of AP you can spend on this type of soldier that makes them tremendously better. Later in the game, you can take No Man's Land and Danger Zone. You can pick up Splinter Armor to shred more. Where they start getting really, really strong offensively is as you get into the late game, you get Line 'em Up, allowing you to shoot rather than shoot suppress. Weapons Hot for tremendous amounts of random damage on every pod that walks into sight. And typically, random throughput's not a good thing, but that's because you're using your actions. You can't commit an action for a random value. Just being given the random value, however, if you're not committing actions to it, is absolutely incredible. And then Aggression for the increased crit chance, or spending AP to get zeroed in, and Withering Barrage for essentially just a 70% chance to graze on a massive swath of enemies with your No Man's Land when you first set it down. Their offensive power starts to spike up really hard in the late game, and in the early game, their defensive power is what keeps you safe, and that doesn't go away in the late game. You just start having a better alternative by, shooting them a lot. I find that defensively, they're one of the most valuable units, and that their late game offense easily pushes them over the edge into A tier. And once again, I've just stayed in resizable the whole time. I hope you don't mind. Above the Marine, riding hard on its early game strength is the Combat Engineer. These guys are just early game gods. There is nothing close to the level of early game power that a Combat Engineer has. They start off with more mobility, a blade of health, blast padding, a shotgun, 2 guaranteed hits with flamethrower. They get so much just at squatty. I had like 8 squatty Combat Engineers just to send on covert ops, so if I ever had to pull them for a mission, I knew they'd be the best squatty they could be. They also have defensive mine, one of the few tools you can use to reliably counter a drop pod in the early game. Yeah, they have that too. They are so strong in the early game, and they fall off very hard as the game progresses. If we were doing an early game ranking, easiest S tier of my life. If we were doing a kernel ranking, probably B tier, maybe even C tier. But overall, I'd put them high in A because the early game is just disproportionately more important to the state of your campaign than the late game is. Coming over to my best Combat Engineer, you can see I'm partial to taking smokescreen, electronic surveillance, and concussion grenades, giving a bunch of separate utility things, and essentially giving this unit the role of a Swiss Army knife, right? Do you need to scan something for line of sight? Is there something invisible? Do you need to entrench a position? Do you need to just throw a normal grenade and stun something? And then you combine that with their built-in rocket launcher, another thing I forgot to mention they have at Squatty. You combine that with their flamethrower, their shotgun. They have so many different tools that they can almost always find a very valuable action to give your team. As you get into the late game, though, the value of stuff like smoke screening its higher aim values drops off. Concussion grenades start being, grenades just don't deal that much damage in the late game compared to the early game. You have abilities like Rouse that just aren't that important. You have stuff like Phosphorus, which is really important. That really helps them to not fall off. This is a big reason that they stick around in power. PCP's Rupture, as opposed to the base game Rupture, you actually have to roll to hit, and on a unit with bad aim progression, it is one of their few weaknesses. That's a little bit rough, but you can easily get a guarantee by getting in close or having someone else give you some sort of aim buff. You have other options that are strong abilities at the final tier as well. I think Cloistered Children might be a little bit nuts, but sadly my campaign didn't get to the point where I could test it. But as I've said so frequently, Colonel matters less than the rest of the game, just tremendously less. On the whole, I think they're a very flexible and strong unit. If you're playing with Frost Legion, they're probably better, right? Like that probably colors my perspective a little bit, that there's an entire type of enemy that is just taking basically double damage from a flamethrower and half damage from everything else. And yeah, that matters a lot. That really makes me care about these guys more. But on the whole, I think they're very flexible, very strong. They offer reliability in the early game in a way that few other classes do, right? You use the flamethrower, you just hit them. You can't run this Overwatch safely on anyone else. This guy has 2 ablative armor, he'll live. Anyone else might not. The value you get from the certainty they provide in early game is absolutely tremendous, and they are a very strong unit throughout the game, but especially right at the start. And as we get into the top of A and the bottom of S, I start getting really conflicted on who goes where. It's very hard for me to say precisely. I think I'm happy to put my field supports right here. They should probably be under Combat Engineers. I like them more, but they are probably less powerful, especially at early ranks where they're kind of just not necessary at all. So let's go talk about field supports and why I love them so much. I don't think they should be higher than Combat Engineers, though. I think that was a mistake. Looking at Den Mother, you can see I've spent a lot of ability points on my A-team field support, and there's good reason for that. You have access to things like electronic surveillance with the guaranteed upgraded scanners for a huge AoE debuff available to your team. You have things that initially are really good, like bandage throw, and efficient targeting isn't that big of a deal, and combat presence is insane, but then you can spend AP on multi-targeting plus efficient targeting for essentially another form of upgraded scanner that stacks with upgraded scanner. That's very, very strong, and then you get later on, and you're like, oh, wait a second, vital point targeting makes this even better. And if you had more AP than God, you could probably justify buying a lot of abilities up here in the Overwatch tree and giving this character a superior PCS to make them an Overwatch character. They're very, very strong characters. A lot of that comes down to their sheer action economy. Supply Run lets them reload other people's guns and then take a blue move. That is incredibly strong just fundamentally, but this additionally works when you're healing them with bandage throw, and the ammo ability in the first place, resupply ammo, is able to give them your ammo types. You can give your whole team armor-piercing ammo and just ignore armor. You can give your whole team black ice rounds if you're on whatever the sit rep is where you have to deal with tons of robots, right? On untimed missions, this ability allows you to get so much value. It's very, very strong. But then as they rank up, they just keep getting more action economy. Low profile, so they don't need the cover anymore. Adrenaline Rush, which is just run and gun because you're not going to shoot your gun. You have other more important stuff to do. Phase, so that you don't trigger Overwatch, so you can do your stuff without actually pulling shots if you're going first and you need to reload someone's gun under threat of covering fire. Reposition, so if you do shoot, you still get that blue move. Sprint, so you know you're going to be blue moving everywhere. You may as well blue move further. May as well free action move into range to throw them the ammo, right? There's so much action economy built into this character, so much team utility. It's the only genuine force multiplier character I've ever seen in XCOM, where the way their support is genuinely by making your other units safer and better. It is a very strong, very interesting, very fun to play with class. I find that I probably consistently overestimate what they're doing because they feel so fun and so impactful to play with. But also, just the ability to hand out ammo, prevent your Marines and Marksmen from needing to reload, save item slots on characters that needed them for grenades. Like, your Zapper shouldn't have armor-piercing ammo, but the fact that he can when this is on the team is really important. Additionally, they have access to all of the utility in the game. Combat presence is an insane ability. They're just a very, very strong type of support character, and I'm shocked that I'm ranking them as highly as I am on the whole, but I think they deserve to be as high as I'm putting them. They're very, very good, although I will say you probably only want like 2 or 3. With most of these other characters, you probably just want as many as you can get, unless you think the character is weak, because like there's no reason not to have more sappers. But specifically with field supports, you don't ever want to have a team with 2 field supports. That would be very, very bad. And likewise, they scale up so much as they get later in the tree that like you don't want to have a situation where like, oh yay, I have 5 field supports. This matters because 3 of them died. So now I have 2 that are at corporal and sergeant. They get so much better later on, right? Like if all of your high-ranking field supports die, you don't want to start over. The class is just not in the campaign anymore. I feel like this is a class that very much only wants a couple of people, like a hero class. You don't want to be investing into huge numbers of these, but I don't think that makes the class worse. Although it does get into a weird gray area where you could be like, well, maybe you just shouldn't build any tech specialists except for the ones you're tech stacking on, right? What if you only made 1 assault and you sent them on all of the mobility missions? Would you rank that differently and then say that you should only build 1? And I think the difference is that I believe this separate from stacking missions. I believe that if there were no covert ops in the game, you would still only want 2 or 3 field supports. It's just the nature of the class. It's not a thing you're doing where you're spending strategic resources because you only have so many covert ops to hand out on the character. It's no opportunity cost anything else. You just don't want more of these. And now we're down to the hero units and the sparks. I could have just said the hero units because God knows the proficiency sparks count as hero units. And I think that while typically I would rank Templars in the S tier, especially the base game Templars, and my mod list with proficiency class nerfing them, and I did say they got nerfed, despite the fact they were given Bladestorm, I think they're only A tier for me. So in the base game, you roll to see if your Templar can get Reaper, if they can get Bladestorm, and that's super impactful. And now you just get Bladestorm and you never get Reaper. And you might think that getting Bladestorm, and additionally, like there are other abilities in the tree that are still very strong. I don't even know if base game Templar gets reanimate. I honest to God don't remember. This seems like it would be a buff, but I honestly think that the nerf to parry, where now it's at the cost of energy, instead of just being a thing you can do every time you stab anyone, is absolutely massive. because they wanted to remake the Templar into a class that spends energy, not hoards it. I agree with that design philosophy. I think base game parry is badly designed and overpowered, but as a result, I think fixing it makes the class weaker. That's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. So in my mod setup, I don't find this character to be too overpowered, and it comes down to the same problems the Assault had. It speaks volumes for how strong the Templar is. Despite being a close-range unit, I think they're an A-tier unit, unlike the Assault. And a lot of that comes down to stuff like guaranteed hits on Volt, guaranteed hits and resource denial for your enemy on Fuse, the ability to roll free action Lightning Hands. They can roll into Lightning Reflexes, stealing the only reason to make an Assault. Their damage and reliability is higher from the start, and it continues to stay higher. They get crazy late game utility like Solace, and additionally they get the, glorified Mimic Beacon with Reanimate. Their capstone abilities are absolutely nuts, even though we didn't get to show them off in this campaign. What the Assault gets is absolutely nothing in comparison to any of these three abilities. The Templar is just functioning at a much higher level than the Assault all campaign long, with a higher level of team utility, and it's not as safe as it is in the base game. Losing parry really does hurt, but it is a very, very strong unit, especially if you roll into the gun perks like I did that allow you to function at range to a much higher degree than a normal Templar would. I know immediately, just immediately, where I rank 3 of these 4 classes and in what order. The one I'm thinking about still is Skirmishers. So let's go look at Skirmishers and think through this live. This is Melancholy Manticore, the normal Skirmisher. The I spent a reasonable amount of ability points and bought Sprint Skirmisher. And you can really easily justify buying more. I think on many Skirmishers, you would like to buy combat conditioning early to make them more reliable in the early game when you can only buy stuff on your hero units. Buying stuff like Phase or Reinforced Cabling isn't crazy. Buying Combat Presence isn't crazy. Buying Untouchable isn't crazy. I bought basically everything on Depressed Draugr to see how it would work. I think this is a much more reasonable approximation of how the class will normally play. Although it is worth noting, the ability to funnel your AP into one super unit is a neat side effect of how I built this tech tree. Their mobility, due to things like sprint and explosive action, is incredibly high. It's worth noting that Hit and Run being at rank 2, again, basically just shits all over the Assault. And I feel like hero classes should be able to shit all over base classes. In the base game, Templars did it, Reapers did it, Skirmishers were the only one who did it, and I'm trying very hard to make it so that they do outperform base game classes. I feel I've accomplished that. I don't necessarily think they outperform other hero classes as I built them. I think Hit and Run being at this rank makes them much better. They have Grappling Hook essentially serving the same function as Run and Gun, and so does Sprint and Explosive Action in the form of just moving further. Their ability to Alpha Strike is almost second to none in terms of units that aren't specifically the Infiltrator and endgame Reapers with Banish. Their ability to provide consistent high output damage throughout the course of the campaign is very, very impressive. I want to put them in S tier, and the reason is because Depressed Draugr rolled Shredder. I think that's what's happening. I think the reason I think it might be an S tier class is strictly to do with Depressed Draugr. Because we come over to this bullshit, and it's like, oh yeah, his gun shreds for 3, and he has a rocket launcher, and he can throw grenades as a blue action. And he's never taken damage, but if he did, he'd take less of it. But I'm just like spending AP for memes at this point, right? Depressed Draugr is an S tier unit, and he fucking should be, because if you're gonna pump 150 ability points into someone, you should get something out of it. But I think that what really pushes him over the edge is the fact that he has Shredder. And I don't think you rank them on that, because you only get 1 or 2 per campaign. You can easily fail to roll Shredder. I put my Skirmisher at the very top of A tier. It's very close to S tier. And if you roll Shredder, I think it is an S tier unit. And if you invest AP into these units, which makes a lot more sense to do on a hero unit where you have that ability at the start of the game as opposed to a normal unit where you only get that ability much later, then you're going to get greater returns on Skirmishers than most other classes. It's so borderline. If I had an A+ tier, it would just be this guy going into it and like nothing else. It's so close to S tier, but I genuinely don't quite think it's there. Unlike the Reaper gives you so much information. It's just in stealth with Proficiency class back. It's in stealth, and if it's not in stealth, it's because you're not letting him go into stealth. You just have a permanent scout with Reapers now, and that's nuts, and none of their abilities matter. I'd already put them in S tier just for that. I am not overstating how much I value this. I think it's one of the craziest abilities in the game to just be guaranteed information the way a Reaper gives it to you. But like, gun to my head if you want me to elaborate. This is not a character that just scouts. you can access to phase and vanish, allowing you to essentially just shoot the enemy, walk away, and re-stealth instantly every turn as early as Sergeant. Alternatively, you can go straight for death from above with either Hawkeye or Infiltration, or you can even take it with phase, so you can shoot somebody else, and then walk away. It's incredibly strong. They have access to tactical rigging, which, when you're a unit designed to kill people, tactical rigging's not that insane, but if you're playing with, mimic beacons, or skeleton turrets, or basically anything you would want to duplicate uses on, tactical rigging is like my Reapers just tend to carry 4 mimic beacons. And sure, you might not roll this, but the fact you can roll something that powerful is very important. They get access to massively boosted damage at Lieutenant with Weapon Specialist and Xenovore, no reason to take one when you could take both. Is this perk set weak? If you're staying out of shadow and constantly shooting people like I am, it is. So just save your AP. Spend it on one of the previous tiers. It's fine. You get access to Banish, the strongest offensive ability in the game, not once but twice per mission. And also, for some reason, we just gave them Face Off. Just fuck it, here you go. And yeah, it's just as good as it was on base game Rangers. I don't quite know why we stole that from them. I think it's funny. I'm glad we did it. But it just feels out of character with the Reaper to have this sidearm thing going. But still, in spite of that, it's very good on them. Reapers are the best scouts in the game throughout the entire game. As you enter into the mid game, their aim increases. You get access to these damaging abilities, stuff like Death from Above for action economy. They start being very effective at actually just killing units. And then as you get into the Supreme late game, you just slap black ice rounds on them, or blue screen, or crash to desktop. Whatever version of modded blue screen rounds you have, and if you don't have any, just normal good old-fashioned blue screen rounds, you slap it on them, you use Banish, you aim them at the Sectopod, or the Rift Keeper, or the Codex Prime, or whatever crazy mod-added enemy we have that happen to be a mech, and it dies. And then maybe something else next to it dies once you have Annihilation. And then you do it again later, in the same mission, because you can. Its ability to solve so many problems at so many points in the campaign. I've talked about your starting unit selection before in campaigns, I think in every campaign, when you're picking which hero unit you start with. I don't think there's a good reason to pick skirmishers. I just don't think there is. Even my modded skirmishers, I just did it because I wanted to test them, and I think that the choice between Reaper and Templar comes down to something very simple. Reapers give you the ability to know what's happening and make better decisions to avoid things going to shit. Templars give you more immediate power to prevent things from falling apart completely once they start to fall apart. A Reaper dodges the crisis. A Templar solves the crisis. And it's my belief that Reapers are so much better at avoiding the crisis, even at like squatty rank, than the Templars are at solving. And then Templars are one of the best squatties in the game because they're guaranteed high damage output, especially because at squatty, the most threatening unit, the sectoid, is weak to them. I think in spite of that, I still prefer the Reaper. My playstyle loves having Reapers, and the sheer amount of problems they can solve over the course of the campaign at every power level as they steadily scale up is just absolutely nuts. I think anyone who's been watching my campaign is probably unsurprised to see the last 2 Laser Sparks as the last man standing, fighting for the crown of strongest unit in this campaign. They have been mainstays of the campaign. It's been a very long time since we sent an assault that did not have both a Pioneer and an Infiltrator on it. And I first want to start off by saying that part of this is just the value of having soldiers that don't get tired. If I were playing with Mechatronic Warfare or base game Sparks, I would still want to have been doing that because you can go on more missions, get more experience and more rewards, and do better by having soldiers that don't get tired. Because you just can't have enough soldiers to go on all the missions in covert infiltration like I'm doing. You need Sparks to help you do that. And that makes any Spark, regardless of power level, invaluable. Just the baseline strategy level function of what a Spark does for roster depth puts them in B tier, I think. It's more valuable than what a medic does for your roster depth. Now, it certainly doesn't hurt that Pioneers and Infiltrators are also just unequivocally the best units in the game that I'm playing, because they're fucking nuts. Let's go look at them and try to figure out which one I think is actually more broken, because it's a very apples to oranges of overpowered bullshit shenanigans. Let's start with Sense Soldier, my Infiltrator. I will say this about Infiltrators compared to Pioneers. You don't feel so inclined to spend AP on them. They have crazy abilities, like Restoration Protocol is here. Tech Specialists don't get that. Field Medics don't get that. This guy, he gets it for some reason. You have this entire stealth tree that I don't personally like. You can go into Overwatch stuff. You can get better at repairing, but I found myself consistently not in need of getting these repair perks. What I found, though, very consistently, is that this bottom line says guaranteed damage, guaranteed damage, guaranteed damage, and bigger AoEs, free action turn off in Overwatch, more aim when you take your Alpha Strike turns, guaranteed damage. Now, spending AP for rapid fire is still pretty good, and getting the free action move so you don't have to blue action move when your next turn starts is also sick. But Combat Protocol is a guaranteed hit. Bombard Protocol, at the point in the game where you get it, is the strongest ability in the game. Like at force level 15, it starts falling off. You can have this at like force level 4. This ability comes in at a point in the game where you click a pod and everyone dies. It's nuts. Then in the late game, it's still a blue action, so someone else almost kills somebody. Then you Bombard Protocol to finish off that guy, and then you shoot someone else to kill them. Oh, by the way, just real quick, it's not shown here. It's very important though. The Helix Rail Cannon just has Shredder. That's just part of the gun. They all have Shredder. Kind of important. So not only does it have all of these guaranteed hits, massively improved heavy weapons for cover destruction and damage and shred, it has a shredding gun, it has the ability to rapid fire that shredding gun eventually. The fact this lets you hack doesn't even matter. I didn't mention it, I've never gotten good use out of it. Capacitor Protocol, or Discharge rather, hasn't been that important for me. I should mention that Neutralize Protocol is absolutely nuts. Shadow Step and Lightning Reflexes allow you to get through a covering fire Overwatch and just stop it through other means. But Neutralize Protocol is the only other means, and certainly the only free action means, of just turning off a covering fire Overwatch. Additionally, you can just unload people's guns. Like 3 guys are in cover next to each other, unload their guns. Just, that'll make them a lot less threatening. Unload their guns, blow up their cover, they're gonna move and reload. You're safe now. Congratulations. Neutralize Protocol is absolutely nuts. The character's just so strong at every step of the game. They evolve from just like being the AoE kill everyone guy into focus firing down priority targets with rapid fire and Shredder, and having insane utility with these same abilities that once made them gods in the early game. They are absolutely incredible units. They feel like they would be strong compared to base game classes, and Proficiency class pack is designed to lower your power level to make the game more fair to the aliens. Now, coming over to Fire Giant, you can see I'm much more inclined to buy things with AP on this unit, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not necessarily a good thing. We're going to first start by talking about what it does. This unit tanks. You take blast padding and a big fuck off shield, and you walk in there with 6 armor. And they just don't kill you anymore. Also 45 dodge, that's part of it. Eventually you get minor kinetic plating, so as people miss you, you generate 2 a blade of health. It maxes out at 2, so you're not going to get crazy piles of it, but that represents a huge amount of health healed over time. You have access to stuff like Breakthrough plus Relentless, so you run in, kinetic strike somebody, get a free move, watch someone else, punch them again. You have access to, you can just barely see it under the shield there, the kinetic strike module for insane damage. I've nerfed it to the ground, it's still nuts. As you get ability points, you can go back and fill in crazy abilities like Lightning Strike to run in, punch somebody, get an action back. Concussion Strike, run in, punch a non-robot, stun it for 2 actions. Burning Rush is just a free action move. Also, it's essentially overdrive in that your emulator here does not end your turn anymore, but the free action move is very often used, like you Burning Rush and then just punch people. You don't actually care about the gun at all. Late game Sacrifice gives you a lot of safety in situations where you otherwise wouldn't have it, because for a tank to be valuable, you need to be the target they're shooting at, and sometimes the way to do that is just by using Sacrifice and being near your team. There are missions in the early game where Fiber Giant was just getting railed by like 12 guys and surviving it. And yeah, he got wounds from it. It was a problem. The mission was a bit sketchy. They could have shot other people, but no other unit does what he does. And now, as we get into the late game, there are just turns where he just like kinetic strikes in, Breakthrough, kinetic strike, or overdrive, kinetic strike 2 more times. It's just so much action economy on the punch that deals so much damage. I will say that his ability to tank goes down a lot as the game goes on. At this point, there are just so many units that just like shoot for 9, shred for 2. The idea of actually tanking with Fiber Giant is scary every time I have to do it. However, he's still able to do it. Sparks, just by virtue of being Sparks, when they get killed, they're not going to die. They have reboot. Once they get killed, they go into stasis with 1 HP and they'll come back later. And you probably want to evacuate them immediately because they have 1 HP, but they don't die permanently, so just fundamentally, he's safer to take that risk than anyone else. And it's a very apples to oranges thing. In terms of dealing with units over the course of a game, Infiltrator wildly ahead of the Pioneer. In terms of dealing with units that couldn't have been dealt with, where there's just too much going on and you have to get shot at, the Pioneer is the only unit in the game that even helps to do it. And what really, for me, makes the Pioneer win this competition is when you get to the Supreme late game, you have Kinetic Strike module and all these abilities, and you click Overdrive. You are across the map. You click Burning Rush too. You move twice with a kinetic strike and punch somebody, breakthrough action, relentless action. You have 3 actions left, one of which is, 4 actions left, one of which is move only, one of which is shoot only, and that's move, punch, 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 right? Like, it's just so much damage. You can deal so much damage so quickly in the Alpha Strike turn and deal with so many units in ways that other units can't replicate. It's such a strong late game offensive powerhouse combined with its universal value as a tank. It's so close. I would love to just like call it a tie and give them both the gold medal. But I can't call it a tie and give them both the gold medal. I have to decide, do I really think the Pioneer wins? It's so hard to say. I remember the missions where the Pioneer got shot by the whole enemy team, and I remember the missions where Bombard Protocol into a rocket launcher dealt with 2 entire pods. They're so comparably broken. But in my heart, I have to give it to Fiber Giant. I feel like they were the more valuable unit over the course of the campaign. And I realize now, at the very end of the campaign, the reason I never made this video beforehand and I wanted to play as much of the campaign as I could before I made this video, why the Infiltrator actually makes it to the top of S tier. Look at who shreds in this list. Look at all my options for shredding armor. That's right, it's the Infiltrator. The Skirmisher can roll Shredder. The Tech Specialist has bad aim. They can take the ability, what is it called? Anti-Armor Doctrine. So can the Combat Engineer. Again, bad aim. The Marine gets Splinter Armor. There's not actually great options for shredding with base proficiency class back classes. And as a result, when you get into the late game and you start seeing absolute shenanigans, Sectopods are showing up with 6 armor, super heavy mechs, Omega Berserkers, Biozerkers, so many high armor enemies, and there's really just no one else as equipped to handle that problem as the Infiltrator. And that prevalence of armor, like I said, that huge asterisk, every single enemy you add to the game affects every class you play with, so the same class in different mod setups will perform differently. The lack of other shredding options combined with the massive need for it in the late game puts the Infiltrator back into the #1 position, but it is incredibly close. Anyways, that'll be it for now. I've been rather incoherent, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about my perceptions of class balance in my most recent modded campaign. I had a good time talking about it, had a great time with the campaign. Sad to call it short, but it is what it is. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.